Hello, and welcome back to another Daily Beacon Sports podcast production. Today, I'm joined with the Battalion, Hunter Mitchell of the Battalion. Hunter, how are you? Introduce yourself. I appreciate you coming on and previewing Tennessee's matchup with Texas A&M this Saturday.
Yeah, I'm doing good. Fall break's been beneficial for the mind, body, and soul, especially after last weekend. Took a little bit of time to recoup. It was a crazy week in College Station, but yeah, like you said, my name's Hunter Mitchell. I'm a sports editor at the Battalion, Texas A&M student newspaper. And yeah, now we're just getting ready. Tomorrow we got print, getting ready preview, like you mentioned, A&M Tennessee.
Yeah, luckily for us on our fall break, we do not print this week, so
Oh.
no stresses there. First thing, Hunter, you talked about last weekend a little bit. Just kind of recap that for some people who obviously Tennessee was on a bye, so a lot of fans got to watch. But recap that game for some of us who didn't get to see that.
Yeah, so oh man. So firstly, and every time I go on any other publication, I have to preface A&M still makes students pull tickets in person. So kind of an outdated thing, but it's kind of evolved into a tradition at this point, whether you like it or not. So there's been students camping in tents outside of Kyle Field since I think halftime of the Auburn game 2 weeks ago before Bama. So we had Auburn and then Arkansas, and then Bama came to town. So a long awaited matchup. Of course, every time Alabama comes into town, third highest attendance in Kyle Field's history. A&M came out offensively, moved the ball really well, I think. But then it's kind of been a problem that A&M has had a lot this season is capitalizing in the red zone. And then secondary got really exploited. Defensive line did their job. And then the second half, A&M got outscored 16-3. Really just felt like there was no rhythm, no flow. Even at the end, still had a chance to win, but just couldn't pull out the victory. And so I think left a bad taste in a lot of Aggie fans' mouth. And truthfully, I think it's kind of out of the frying pan into the fire now this week.
Yeah, and an interesting stat I saw from that game and just kind of watching it on Saturday was Alabama wants to run the ball and Texas A&M only allowed I think 20 or 23 rushing yards on the
Yeah,
ground.
20. It was 23 rushing yards. Yep.
And now Texas A&M gets to come to Knoxville and Tennessee is averaging over 6 yards an attempt and 231.2 yards a game on the ground. What do you expect from that defensive front this weekend? Do you think they can stop Tennessee's run game? What are some keys from that front?
So I would say that this season has really felt like, and I wouldn't even say the season. I'd say after the Miami game, because Miami game there was no pressure on Tyler Van Dyke, and he absolutely picked apart the secondary. But since then, it was a complete tonal shift. A&M's defensive line really looks like one of the best units in the country, which is kind of what you'd expect. You'd hope with loaded with 5 stars like Walter Nolan, LT Overton, Shamar Stewart, all those guys have just really been terrorizing offensive lines since then. I mean, Alabama and Arkansas don't have the best offensive lines, but I think it was either 5 or 6 sacks against Auburn and Arkansas. That was the A&M became the fourth team in the last 20 seasons to have 15 plus tackles for loss in a 2-game stretch. The defensive line has been easily the best unit on probably on the entire team, I'd say. They've been really just ravaging offensive lines, but not just on defensive front. The linebacking core has been, in my opinion, maybe even more impressive. It was kind of looked as maybe a weak spot going into the season, but Edgerrin Cooper has come in and he's a very downhill in the trenches blitzing linebacker who delivers a lot of hard hits. And then freshman Torian York has really stepped in. He got freshman of the week. I think it's Auburn. I think at 11 tackles. I think a couple tackles for loss and a sack. But the linebacking core has been really good. And I think it's supplementing that defensive line in the essence that when they blitz now, you're getting pressure from the defensive front, but the linebackers know how to get in there and disrupt things too. So I think from that side, that's really the unit to watch for defensively, to watch out for. But in that backfield, the secondary has been, kind of tale of two sides, because if the defensive front's the best looking unit on the entire team, the secondary is probably the worst unit. Jermaine Burton absolutely decimated, like single-handedly, A&M secondary. Josh DeBerry had a really hard time covering him in man. They tried dropping him in zone. It was worse. Um, so really, the secondary has to have the defensive line create pressure and create havoc because that's how they are able to operate, and that's how they've had actually semi decent pass numbers. I feel like it's kind of deceiving because a lot of those pass numbers are simply because quarterbacks haven't had time to throw the ball. KJ Jefferson was absolutely thrashed in that game. He there was like a stretch where he got sacked like 3 times in a row, and so you look at the pass numbers and you think, wow, they must have a pretty solid secondary. I think it's their worst. I think it's A&M's worst unit. So Tennessee wants to find success offensively. Legitimately, I think it's gonna be hard to run the ball. I think that they're gonna have a hard time stuffing or trying to find open lanes because A&M is gonna stuff those lanes with linebackers. So I really think Tennessee is going to have to pass the ball, and I think they can against A&M secondary. It's really just if that line can give up enough time to throw the ball, actually. But that's kind of how it was when Alabama was coming in as well. The whole agenda was Jalen Milroe runs the ball, Chase McClellan. They really want to put the ball on the ground, and they couldn't get it going, so they just started throwing the ball, and it worked. So I think really it's kind of that same formula for Tennessee going in this game.
Yeah, and you mentioned Walter Nolan. He's went to high school in Knoxville, graduated from Pal, not far from campus. So I guess it's sort of a homecoming for him. And like you mentioned, Texas A&M secondary is probably their worst unit, but it's very hard for a quarterback to throw the ball if he's on the ground. So
Yeah.
luckily that defensive line has come through. Texas A&M leads the nation in tackles for loss, with tied with USC, and then Tennessee is right behind them. So that'll be an interesting line of scrimmage battle. To pivot over to the other side, you got Max Johnson leading the offense with Connor
Yeah.
Wegman out hurt. How would you grade his performance thus far?
So, I mean, I wrote in a recap when I think it was the Auburn game and Max Johnson came in. I kind of jokingly put Max Johnson maybe the best backup in the SEC because he's an SEC caliber starting quarterback. Truthfully, I mean, he started for LSU. I led him to a winning season. Even I kind of thought it was kind of a head scratcher when he transferred to A&M because he was a starting quarterback. So I really truthfully feel like the offense has not missed much of a beat without him. I think it may have taken a small dip, maybe, but Connor Wigman in his own ways is still kind of coming into his own as well. So it's not like he had completely blossomed and emerged yet. I mean, he had a lot of really good outings and good performances, but he still had some youthful mistakes. So I feel like Max Johnson brings a little bit of that experience, even though he is, technically a sophomore. He's been playing college football for longer than many sophomores with COVID and everything. So I think his performance has been really solid. I think the part that really is kind of getting everybody, and it kind of ties into Connor Wigman as well, is the offensive line. The offensive line against Miami really struggled, and so they had a lot of question marks. Even against Auburn, only gave up 2 sacks, but Wigman injured for the season, whether it be the offensive line's fault or not. Did a way better job against Arkansas, and then against Alabama, they were shredded. Truthfully, in the second half, and Max Johnson had no time to throw the ball. A&M was trying to mount a comeback, and he just had no time. Which Tennessee leading the nation in sacks. That's why I say it's kind of out of the frying pan into the fire. It is really the time for A&M's offensive line to step up if there was ever a time, on the road against defense that's going to generate a lot of sacks. So it's been a very touchy subject, and I don't know how much or what A&M plans to do to fix it. It's kind of hard to really fix an offensive line on the fly. There is some experience there, like we have graduate Layden Robinson and center Bryce Foster. So I think many are scratching their head as to what's up with this unit. Fingers are getting pointed at Steve Adazio, the offensive line coach. The whole thing of when one unit's bad, coach gets call for his head. But I think offensively, that's the worst unit, is the offensive line. And so they'll have to find a way to run the ball. I think, you've got kind of a 3-headed monster at running back with Ruben Owens, Le'Veon Moss, Amari Daniels, who they all kind of cycle in and run the ball. I think Le'Veon Moss is more of kind of your in between the trenches kind of guy. Mario Daniels is a little bit of your speed guy, and Ruben Owens I would kind of classify as kind of the same way, but he's a better pass catching back in my opinion. Um, but A&M could not run the ball against Alabama, but they will have to against Tennessee, um, which is a little bit of a shame because A&M's strongest offensive unit is probably their wide receiving core. You have Evan Stewart, Anai Smith, even like Jade Walker, Moose Muhammad, really solid unit there. Um, but I think that a unit that has not had to step up has been the running backs, and I think that will need to be the case this game if they want to have success.
Do you think the offense changed any from Connor Wegman to Max Johnson? I know, like you said, Max Johnson started, I want to say 1, 2 years at LSU, was successful, had a game-winning pass against A&M,
Yep.
transfers to A&M the next
Yeah.
year, didn't play very much last year, and now he's kind of thrust into this starting role. Do you think the offense changed at all? That Bobby Petrino offense? We talked to Tennessee defensive coordinator Tim Banks today, and he talked about how weird it was trying to game plan for that offense because you don't really see the four backs and the offense that
Yeah.
Bobby Petrino runs. So, what changes have you seen, if any, from Connor Wegman to Max Johnson?
Firstly, from last year's offense to this year's offense is night and day. AM was actually scoring points this year. It was a really, really big struggle last year to get any points on the board. But now you're actually seeing a lot of offensive rhythm, moving the ball down the field. But from Connor to Max, I mean, one thing is Connor was a little bit more prone to scrambling, whether that be simply because he had more faith in his legs or he was unsure of himself in the pocket. Max Johnson likes to sit in the pocket a lot more and really only scrambling absolutely have to. He's got really good wheels though. He's definitely not a pocket passer by any means. He can roll out and run the ball really efficiently. But Max is prone to sitting in the pocket and sometimes too long. Some of the sacks against Alabama were simply because he didn't either throw the ball away or roll out. He really tries to sit in the pocket as long as he possibly can to find the receiver, which works sometimes. Sometimes it really is to the detriment of the offense. So other than that, I think there hasn't been too much of a change. I think A&M is getting the ball. I mean, Bobby Petrino's philosophy is feed the studs, and so I think that's kind of been A&M's mentality. Is getting the ball to their playmakers this year, which has really done a number for the offense. So I don't think it has shifted all too much. But I think we're seeing a lot more like sitting in the pocket, which I think is kind of why um, the offensive line is getting a little bit more exposed now. It's because there's a lot more drop back, sit in the pocket, wait to find a receiver. And so I think that's why we're seeing the glaring issues with the offensive line show themselves.
You mentioned the running backs and passing. Sounds like Texas A&M has a three-headed monster. Tennessee also boasts a same quote, three-headed monster. For Texas A&M's, how do you think they will fare in Neyland Stadium, those running backs, against a defensive line who is second to only A&M in tackles for loss, leads the nation in sacks per game? And like you said, there's a lot of questions on offensive line. So how do you think A&M's running backs will fare?
Yeah, so I think that probably the best performing back has probably been Le'Veon Moss, which is kind of your in between the trenches kind of guy, but he does have really good open field speed. He has a good burst. Um, Really, I mean, I think they need to get lateral. I think if they want to avoid the tackles for loss, sometimes A&M likes to spread the field and space the field in some of their runs. They'll do a pull and kind of get around the outside. I don't see that working very well. I think that it's really just gonna have to be big man on big man, kind of old school SEC football, and I think you're going to have to see those running backs get into the trenches and get those 3 yard runs, 4 yard runs, and methodically kind of pick apart. But that also again relies on is the offensive line going to be able to block them? It's going to be a tough challenge, but I think that the reliance on the pass game last week really emphasized the issues on the offensive line and the issues on the offense. So it's going to have to be a more even, diversified playbook instead of just throwing the ball. Or else, I really, I really think A&M's offensive line is going to have some serious struggles against Tennessee's defensive front.
Awesome, Hunter. We've got our scouting report on Texas A&M. Before we get into score predictions, game predictions, Jimbo talked a lot yesterday about Tennessee having the ambidextrous punter, Squirrel White, running around the field. Just early in this week, what's kind of been your feel about the team and kind of the vibe in College Station?
So I think that there was a lot more hope in terms of beating Alabama at home than going on the road against Tennessee. I think Alabama was a good litmus test to kind of get the feel of playing top SEC talent. And, A&M didn't lose. It was 26-20, so not like A&M went and got smoked at home. But Neyland Stadium is arguably one of the best, not only in the SEC but in the entire country, one of the best environments. So I think that this is really the team's first true road test. Miami has struggles bringing people in. It was a decent crowd, but nothing will be like Neyland Stadium at 2:30 prime time. So I really just think it's gonna show a lot, much like Alabama was kind of a showing of where A&M's at. I think this week is probably even bigger. How can they handle going on the road? How can they handle a hostile environment? How can they handle a top 20 team? I think there's a lot of real question marks, and I think that kind of the vibe is kind of holding. It feels like everyone's holding their breath a little bit to see, is this team going to sink or are they going to swim? And so I think that they're really getting thrown in the deep end right now, and that's the question.
Awesome, Hunter. So before we let you go, how do you see the game playing out on Saturday, and what would be your score prediction?
So after seeing the offensive line and knowing what Tennessee can do, it's really hard to envision any other outcome really. I think if A&M can find a way to get it to their guys in open space, maybe finally get out to the receivers and avoid those drive killing sacks. I think A&M has a chance, but really, I kind of feel like I think it's gonna be close, but I think at home, prime time, I think Tennessee probably pulls it out. Um, Again, I think it will be close. I'm probably gonna say for Tennessee, I'd probably say 31-24 Tennessee. That's what I would say.
I feel like my score prediction would be pretty close to yours. Hunter, before we let you go, why don't you go ahead and plug everything y'all are doing at the battalion and where people can find you?
Yeah, so I'm on Twitter, Hunter M1001. The battalion is the Battle Online. I'm a co-host of the Battalion Sports Desk podcast, which is the Home Turf podcast. So you can find it anywhere you find your podcast, Spotify, Apple Music, etc. Other than that, I think that's about it.
Awesome. Well, Hunter, I appreciate it. Looking forward to Tennessee's matchup with Texas A&M, like you said, 3:30 Eastern, 2:30 Central Time, prime time on CBS. For Hunter Mitchell, I'm Caleb Jarreau, and this has been another production of the Daily Beacon Sports Podcast.